This is Litigating History. In this video, we're going to try to make a deep dive into the historical record of a discrete historical fact that is highly disputed to see where the weight of the evidence takes us. In this video, we're going to look at the Battle of Nijmegen on September 18, 1944, and the performance of General James Gavin, commanding officer of the American 82nd Airborne Division. Some claim his decisions on this day resulted in the failure of the entire Operation Market Garden. This is the fifth in a series of videos. In the first video, we discussed how the decision to de-emphasize the Nijmegen Bridge as a day one objective was made by Gavin's boss, Corps Commander General Frederick Browning, not Gavin. In the second video, we discussed why this was a rational military decision based upon the pre-drop intelligence. In the third video, we discussed Gavin's day one orders and the awkward way they were followed. In the fourth video, we discussed the initial bridge defenses and what plan of attack might have succeeded on day one. In this fifth video, we're going to discuss the second night and why no attack was made. Was the second night the real lost opportunity? Here is the 82nd's area of responsibility again, and here were their objectives. The major bridge over the Maas River at Grave, the four bridges over the Maas Wall Canal, the infamous Grosbeek Heights, and last but certainly not least, the Nijmegen bridges over the Wall River. And here is how they landed on day one. They proceeded to secure all of their objectives except the Nijmegen Bridge. On the first night, the night of the 17th, there was an attack on the bridge by A Company of 1st Battalion 508, later supported by B Company. That attack failed as described in the third and fourth videos of this series. On the morning of the 18th, the second day of the battle, there was a second attack on the bridge by G Company, 3rd Battalion 508. That second attack was too small of a force and failed as well. However, after the failure of the attack on the morning of the 18th, there was not another concerted attack on the bridge until late in the day on the 19th, after the link-up with the Guards Division. There were patrols, but there was no attack. So why was there no attack on the bridge for over 24 hours? The 82nd had the advantage of numbers. Why not try to overwhelm the defenders with multiple battalions instead of companies from multiple directions? The answer is illuminating for a number of reasons. Here is the 82nd Division's G3 journal, contemporaneous notes taken during the heat of battle. This is as reliable of an original source as you can get. Here is an entry from an in-person meeting between Corps Commander Browning and General Gavin around 3:30 p.m. on the 18th, the second day of the battle. They would have just recently learned that the first two attacks on the bridge by Lindquist's 508 were unsuccessful. Nevertheless, Browning specifically orders Gavin that his number one mission was to hold the line on the Grosbeek Heights, and his secondary mission was to seize the bridge by the night of the 19th or the early morning of the 20th. That clearly shows Browning's priorities, even at this point in the battle. High ground first, Nijmegen Bridge later. The argument that Browning just reluctantly assented to Gavin's decision to deprioritize the Nijmegen Bridge simply makes no sense when you consider the fact that Browning carried the same prioritization throughout the battle. But it gets even worse, well for the Browning fans and the Gavin haters. Here is the 82nd Division's Chief of Staff journal, and here is the entry for the same meeting between Gavin and Browning on the afternoon of the 18th. Gavin told Browning that he was planning on making a strong attack on the bridge that night, the night of the 18th, utilizing up to 4 battalions to envelop the defenders from 2 directions. Browning initially approved the plan, but on second thought, decided that defending the high ground was of greater importance. They could put off the attack that Gavin was planning that night until the next night, when they would presumably have the assistance of the tanks of the 30th Corps. This one piece of evidence is conclusive that without a doubt puts the blame on Browning for any delay at Nijmegen, if any blame is deserving. Even after the failure on the 17th, the Allies still had a chance to take the bridge before the SS arrived in strength and before the 30th Corps got up the road to Nijmegen. But Browning once again deprioritized the Nijmegen Bridge and prioritized the Grosbeek Heights on the crucial night of the 18th. Here is the G2 report for the first day of battle, midnight of the 17th. This would represent the state of knowledge at Gavin's headquarters as of the end of the day of the first day of battle. All they knew at this time was that there was some resistance in Nijmegen. Details were not yet available. However, the report shows that the division was making significant efforts to identify all of the units that they encounter. They wanted to know who they were fighting. Allegedly, an SS motorized infantry column from the 10th SS Panzer Division won the race to Nijmegen, but there is no mention of any SS in this report. However, their appearance was supposed to be late in the night in the city far from divisional headquarters, so it might be understandable that their appearance would go unnoticed in this end-of-day report on the first day. Here is the G2 report for the second day, September 18th. This would represent the state of knowledge at Gavin's headquarters as of midnight, the end of the second day. This would have been the night that Gavin's plan of attack would have taken place had Browning not called it off. They now should have had pretty accurate information concerning what they were facing in Nijmegen. A and B companies of the 508 had fought in Nijmegen the previous night, and G Company had just recently fought in Nijmegen this very morning. Their estimate of the Nijmegen defenses was a reinforced company plus considerable flak troops. The report covers G Company's unsuccessful attempt on the bridge that morning, so you would expect this report to contain the information learned from the first two attacks. Again, the report makes significant effort to set forth all of the units that they can identify. The only reference to the SS is the capture of one SS housekeeper. Now, the biggest news of the day on the 18th should have been that a motor convoy of an SS Panzer Division made an appearance the night before. However, tellingly, there is absolutely no mention whatsoever of either the 9th or the 10th SS in this end-of-day report on the 18th, just a housekeeper. And just so it's clear that this was the Allied consensus as of the end of the day on the 18th, here is a status report from the British Airborne Corps dated as of the end of the day on September 18. Nijmegen is probably held by a reinforced company with many flak troops, and the Germans have set the buildings south of town on fire. So both the Americans and the British agreed that Nijmegen was defended by approximately a reinforced company as well as considerable flak. That sounds a lot like Camp Group Hankey. Neither the Americans nor British reports made any mention of the supposed huge news that an SS Panzer Division had made an appearance. Maybe there was no mention of the SS because their appearance had not yet been made by the end of the day on the 18th. And that would be consistent with 10th SS General Harmel's statement that the ferry at Pannerden did not start running until that night. The only element of the 10th SS that made it to Nijmegen on the 18th were engineers to make sure the bridges were wired for demolition. The first combat element did not arrive until the 19th. Here is the history of the 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment by William Lord. On the 18th, they had some fighting in Nijmegen at the landing zones and in the German border town of Weiler. But by the afternoon, things had calmed down, and all was quiet all during the night. So most, if not all, of the 508 could have been employed in Gavin's planned night attack on the 18th. Perhaps the 1st Battalion of the 508 would need to have been held in reserve after hard fighting in Nijmegen and on the landing zones, but that would still leave 6 companies from the 508, as well as 508 regimental support troops, plus 3 more companies from the 504, 9 total companies plus regimental support troops. So on the night of the 18th, the SS had not yet appeared in force. Camp Group Hankey had been depleted by the prior night battle with A and B companies and the day battle with G Company that morning, and the entire 508 was experiencing a relatively quiet night. This was the night that Browning called off Gavin's powerful attack on the bridge by the 508 and a battalion of the 504. If Browning would have permitted Gavin's attack to go forward as planned, it most likely would have been successful. A reinforced company of second-rate troops could not have resisted a coordinated attack as described in the G2 Journal report. It was Browning's deprioritization of the bridge, even after 2 days of battle, that resulted in the failure to capture the bridge on the night of the 18th. That night, the night of the 18th, was the real opportunity that slipped through the Allies' fingers because everything changed on the 19th. Here is the G2 report for the end of the day on the 19th. German Marines were entrenching the north shore of the wall. Pillboxes and gun emplacements were on both sides of the two bridges, and SS troops finally appear in force and are reported to be holding the south end of the Nijmegen Bridge. The estimated 500 Germans on the southern end of the two bridges continued their tenacious resistance. So the G2 reports are perfectly consistent with Harmel's statements. The 10th SS did not arrive in force until the day of the 19th, but by the end of that day, the SS were in position to tenaciously defend the bridge. This means that on the night of the 18th, the bridge was still only being held by the battered Kampfgruppe Hankey. Gavin's attack would have had an overwhelming superiority in both sheer numbers as well as the quality of the troops. Under cover of darkness, this attack would most likely have been successful if Browning had not called it off in favor of defending the high ground and waiting for the tanks of the 30th Corps. So, was the real lost opportunity the second night, September 18? It appears so. Gavin planned to attack the bridge on the second night, the 18th, with a strong force that probably would have secured the bridge before the 10th SS could arrive in force. However, the records indicate that Browning again ordered Gavin to prioritize the high ground and delay attacking the bridge. This is a recorded instance where Browning exercised his authority over Gavin and overruled a plan devised by Gavin to seize the bridge. I'm sorry, but this is pretty much case closed as to who deprioritized the bridge. So if it is your theory that the delay at Nijmegen was the cause of the failure of the operation, a dubious theory to begin with, then your scapegoat must be Browning, not Gavin. Browning deprioritized the bridge on day one, resulting in the failure to seize it on the 17th. Even if you dispute that, it cannot be reasonably disputed that Browning called off this attack on the night of the 18th. So the only reason the bridge was not in Allied hands when the 30th Corps arrived on the 19th was because of decisions made by Browning. The fact that Browning overruled Gavin on this night attack on the 18th proves two important facts. One, Browning really did prioritize the high ground, even if it meant delaying an attack on the bridge. And two, Browning had no problem overruling Gavin, his subordinate. There is this convenient myth out there that Browning really wanted an immediate coup de main against the Nijmegen Bridge on the 17th, but he was reluctant for some reason to overrule his American subordinate. This myth is not supported by anything other than the hopeful supposition and is directly contradicted by this well-documented instance where Browning overruled Gavin and called off the attack on the bridge. If you disagree with my conclusions, let me know in the comments. If you have any sources that dispute my findings, I'm willing to be proven wrong. Let me know.